It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Here's truly Warner Lewis from the flight deck, and of course, as always, that means some smart talk radio is in your future, and this segment, no exception. We're very pleased to have with us today Judy Frankel. She is a master gardener, food activist, blogger for the Huffington Post. She's also the author who is leading the movement to fix Washington, D.C., a formidable task indeed. A brand new work called In Search of the Next POTUS, One Woman's Quest to Fix Washington, a True Story. It gives voters the tools to combat corruption in Congress while choosing a qualified leader for the White House. Today we'll be talking about the congressional blacklist, amongst other issues. Indeed. Judy, how are you, my friend?
Hi, Warner. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, we're very pleased to have you here. Let's do this, give you a little bit better setup. Share, if you would, with our Lewis at Large listeners, a little bit more about your background and why politics, in particular, fixing Washington, is so important to you if it isn't obvious to everyone else.
Well, in 2011, I, like a lot of people, was pretty disgusted with Obama because even the promises that he made to his legions of voters were falling through, and he didn't deliver. And actually, he made things worse. He was making the NDAA, he was codifying the rules in the NDAA that takes away some of our most cherished rights. For example, habeas corpus. We now have a government that can lock you up in jail, not tell your next of kin, and, basically you could just disappear. Those kind of things were really upsetting me, and I had voted for him, so it's not like I disliked him. I really thought that he was going to bring change, but actually I saw more and more that he was controlled by the kind of interests that I'm not interested in having my president controlled by. For example, he just recently signed the DARK Act, which makes it impossible for us to know for sure what's in our food. And that's how I started working on the congressional blacklist. I had seen since 1999 that Congress was passing some legislation to make it easier for the bankers to do things that most Americans don't want to see happen. And Clinton signed the Financial Services Modernization Act in 2000 as a result of Congress allowing things like Travelers to merge with Citicorp. And that used to be illegal under the Glass-Steagall protections. And so what we now see, that there were two bills. One was the Financial Services Modernization Act, also called the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. That made it possible for these securities and investment firms to merge with banks. And the other piece of legislation, which we haven't seen the full effect of yet, but it's coming down the pike, is the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. That was also signed in 2000 by Clinton. And what that does is it makes derivatives opaque. It's impossible to ever trace it back to the original deals that were made. They're basically bets. It's shorting the market, and shorting, is not always a good thing because it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the hedge fund managers who sell derivatives get their payday, and often it's the taxpayer left on the hook to bail out the bank when the derivatives go bad. In fact, Warren Buffett has called derivatives the financial instruments of mass destruction. So we have not seen yet, but we're kind of waiting. I think anybody in the markets is probably expecting this to fall apart because derivatives now have blown up to over $1 quadrillion in notional value. So we don't just think it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. And unfortunately, they wrote into the 2015 end of the year, got to pass it budget to make Citicorp inure to any kind of derivatives problem by saying, codifying in that pork of the 2015 regulations. I'm sorry, 2014. That they would never have to worry about going insolvent. That they would always be bailed out. It's in our law now because of that. I don't know if most Americans care about it, but they're going to care when the derivatives market explodes, and then we have to bail them out. So those two pieces of legislation, if you had been in Congress and the Senate or the Senate, you are now on the blacklist, and there's still a handful of incumbents that are being reelected every year that have passed those things. So I don't want to leave them off the hook. And there's two other pieces of legislation I think are the worst possible piece of legislation as far as it hits right home for almost every American. And one is about to be passed if we don't do something about it quickly. The other one is the DARK Act that was just passed and makes it impossible for us to know whether or not our food is sprayed with Roundup and we're eating that stuff. So, but I want to get back to the first piece of legislation that's really bad. It's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Clinton has 45 times endorsed it in front of her funders. So we already know that she has been for it all her life. She actually helped craft some of the legislation in it. So for her to say that she's against it now is disingenuous. But it doesn't even matter what her position is, because really it's about Obama. And he said he's going to sign it. He's already agreed to it. He's pushing it. And they passed a fast-tracking of this bill so that no one can deliberate it on the floor of Congress. It doesn't get discussed out in the open so that the public knows what they're thinking about. It just gets shoved through on a yes or no vote. And that's what's coming up through Thanksgiving through Christmas. So let me tell you what's in this bill. It's 30 chapters long, and if you want to read it or you want to read the Cliff Notes on it, the best description of it really was done by a guy named Steve Gladstone. He's running for Senate in Maryland as an independent. And he's one of the few people in the country who's read the whole thing. And then he went through chapter by chapter and did some Cliff Notes on it. And the first and worst thing about it is it allows corporations to sue our government for any regulation that stands in the way of them making a profit. So let's say if you wanted to ban fracking, which isn't really a Kansas issue, but if you wanted to, and you passed a state law that said in New York you aren't allowed to frack, well, the TPP makes it possible for a gas company to come in and sue the New York state government, and then the taxpayers in New York are on the hook for paying any settlements that are decided by a tribunal of 3 attorneys who are handpicked by the corporations that are suing. Basically, I mean, a lot of these attorneys are trade attorneys. They have specialized knowledge. They've already been helping these corporations write these trade agreements in their favor. And so it's very hard to find a trade attorney who hasn't been working for these corporations. So the problem is they can also sue the federal government, and that puts us taxpayers on the hook for these settlements. I mean, basically, it's raiding the Treasury every time one of these lawsuits comes before this tribunal. And the tribunal is extrajudicial. That means it's above any of our courts. you cannot appeal these decisions. There is no appeal process. So, I mean, that's one of the things in this 30-chapter agreement.
Well, Judy, let me ask you something. By anybody's measure, whether you agree with them or not, Obama and Hillary Clinton would be considered falling on the liberal side of the ledger on most issues. The way you're describing it, it sounds like it would not be that way. So, and your point through all of this, therefore, is what?
Well, it's going to affect all of our lives if we allow these trade agreements. Really are very stacked in favor of multinationals and banks. For example, the U.S. Business Coalition for the TPP includes the banking firms Citibank, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. Their objective to the TPP is to prevent any regulations that would hamper the continued unregulated practices of the banking industry. So this TPP would prohibit any taxes that would discourage super-rich speculators, the kind that caused the crash of 2008. It would restrict firewall reforms that would mimic the Glass-Steagall protections. It will roll back reforms that member governments adopted to fix the extreme banking deregulations that caused the 2007-2008 Wall Street crash, and it would provide a safeguard against laws that would limit the size of too-big-to-fail companies. So we can just expect to keep bailing out banks if this TPP passes. The other thing is we can't buy American. The TPP empowers multinational corporations to sue local governments if we want to apply domestic laws that go against these trade regulations. So basically, if you wanted to build a road through your township, and one of these multinationals comes in and says, well, we want to build the road instead, and if you decide, well, these locals are going to do it a lot cheaper, we'd like to go with them, this trade agreement makes it possible for the multinational to say, well, wait a minute, we're going to sue you. And just the threat of the lawsuit, because they're so expensive, could cause the local economy to say, okay, well, we'll have to go with you because we can't afford the lawsuit. They cost, on average, $8 million just to set up a defense against it.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. This segment, we're talking to Judy Frankel. She's a master gardener, food activist. She's also a blogger for the Huffington Post and author on who is leading the movement to fix Washington. And that book is called In Search of the Next POTUS, One Woman's Quest to Fix Washington, A True Story. So, Judy, who, if in political terms, as you look left and right, who is sort of marching with you? What organizations share the position that you do and you're finding some support with? So
the Frontier, there's a organization, the name escapes me right now, that's against the TPP because it also has regulations against the Internet, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF. They have been basically fighting against this because it would clamp down on our rights to use the Internet for free. Right now we have this unlimited access speed-wise, but according to the TPP, if they wanted to, they could slow down for certain websites and not others, whatever your transmission speed is. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation is up in arms about this. And anybody who ever fought the Stop Online Piracy Act, SOPA, and PIPA, those are similar laws. Well, this is actually SOPA and PIPA on steroids. So if you want to be able to use the Internet without having to worry about whether the speed is going to get slowed down by your Internet service provider on purpose, so that you have to pay extra to surf the sites that you're used to having, quickly. And if you don't pay for it, what they'll do is they'll make let's say Amazon. Amazon's such a behemoth, they can't afford to worry about your Internet speed because they want you to buy from them. right? Well, they can extract money from Amazon and put little guys out of business completely if Amazon decides to be in cahoots with these internet service providers. I mean, it's so bad that Google is against it. So we have some large groups that are anti-TPP. The problem is that Congress does not listen to us anymore. And I know because I've been calling my representatives in California to try to get them to not pass the DARK Act, and they did anyway. We had hundreds of thousands of people making phone calls on a regular basis to stop the DARK Act. And that's why when the TPP gets ushered through, they're going to try to do it right after you just voted them back in, which, by the way, I put all the people who fast-tracked the TPP, they're on that blacklist. And they should not be voted in because they can't be trusted to not pass it. You have to essentially get them to promise or pledge not to pass it before you should vote for them, because otherwise they'll just do what the hell they want when they get in office. I'm sorry about swearing. But this is what we're faced with today is once these congressmen get into office, they're descended upon by 33,000 lobbyists who don't have the American population's interest at heart. They really just only care about the businesses that pay them buku bucks for their lobbyist job. And there are such huge interests who want to pass this TPP. They got the big bucks. For example, Pharma, they're going to get 20 years on, this is what they wrote in for themselves, they're going to get 20 years on a patent, and if they tweak the formulation of a drug just a little bit, they can just add a little additive. Doesn't even have to change the main ingredient. They can then extend that patent another 20 years, and that delays the cost-saving generics from entering the market. So people who are against drug prices going up are up in arms about the TPP. I'm telling you, it affects so many areas of our lives.
Judy,
the jobs thing.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just in the interest of time. A couple of things I did want to cover. You'd mentioned earlier the congressional blacklist. I'd like to go a little deeper in that. Share with us, with our listeners, if you would, a little bit about that and why it's so important.
So I decided to, first of all, I have to go back a little bit. I started in 2011 a federal elections website that listed all the candidates running for office in 2012, whether federal, all the congressional candidates, all the Senate seats that were open, and, of course, the President of the United States. So I figured out, once you have them all listed and they're side by side, which no other website's done that, where they're listed side by side and their position or their platform basically is listed right on the website. I thought this is really powerful. You can ask them a question and they got to answer it. Well, I was starting to ask them to take this pledge for honest candidates. This is where it all started. And that pledge basically it was very short and sweet. It basically said if you took more than $100, you wouldn't take any more than $100 from any person or entity once you got into office, and that you would pass this pledge as law once you got in. Well, lucky for me, someone took and ran with this idea of the basically like a pledge, but they took that, clamping down on taking money thing, and they wrote the American Anti-Corruption Act. A lawyer from the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, who used to be a commissioner, Trevor Potter, wrote an excellent law that we should pass in the United States called the American Anti-Corruption Act that makes it impossible for any person who's running for office to take more than $500 from a lobbyist. And they can't work for the same firm. They can't turn around until 5 years after getting out of office to work for a lobbyist firm. So that stops the revolving door somewhat. And then they can't sit on a committee where they would have to pass laws that would favor their donors. So this American Anti-Corruption Act, basically, I'm putting it right into the pledge now, the Pledge for Honest Candidates. And I figured we should tell people who their representatives are that are voting against us in Congress so that they can know whether their representatives corrupt or not, because they're already corrupt. And I'm telling you from this blacklist who is corrupt. So it's kind of a no-brainer. But anyway, I wrote a piece called The Congressional Blacklist. It's on Huffington Post. And then you can go to pledgeforhonestcandidates.com, and I actually have the downloadable PDF for free that you can download this list. And we can actually, the citizens, decide whether or not we want these people still in office. The people who passed the DARK Act, the people who passed those terrible banking deregulation acts, and the people who are about to pass the TPP. Because I'm telling you, phone calls and letters isn't cutting it. These people are not listening to us anymore. The funders have so much power.
Well, Judy, as they say, we're out of time here. Unfortunately, we've moved through quite a bit here, a lot of material. Again, Judy Frankel, she's a master gardener and food activist, but right now intensely blogging for Huffington Post, and also a brand new work called In Search of the Next POTUS, One Woman's Quest to Fix Washington, a True Story. Judy, again, give our listeners, if they how can they pick up a copy of the book, find out a little bit more about the writings that you do. You mentioned a website, but share some more information with us.
Well, the best place to go is right to pledgeforhonestcandidates.com, because, and if you forget, pledgeforhonestcandidates.com is the website. You can just type in Pledge for Honest Candidates in Google. It'll come up, in your Google search. That's the main way we can affect change, because if we don't hold our candidates to task, how do we know what they're going to do once they get to Washington? So that's pledgeforhonestcandidates.com.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us today. Do appreciate it. Again, Judy, a brand new work, In Search of the Next POTUS, One Woman's Quest to Fix Washington, a True Story. Listen, have a great day, and we'd love to have you back on again, probably sometime after the election, and we'll do a debrief. How about that?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Thanks so much. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large. You love your dog, and you love your yard. But sometimes what your dog leaves behind can make you not love your yard so much. Well, when that happens, it's Call of Duty Pet Waste Removal Service to the rescue. Large or small dogs, big yard or small, call Call of Duty. They clean up the mess your dog leaves behind. So if you're tired of cleaning pet waste from your yard, call Call of Duty, 764-7224. That's 764-7224. Prompt, effective, courteous services on the way. Your yard is left clean and waste-free. So don't waste any more time on waste. Call Call of Duty in Lawrence, 764-7224. That's 764-7224. Or visit their website, callofduty2010.web.com.